I think it's about time to check on the Vikings Blood. Alright, so this Vikings Blood has been going for 2 weeks today. When we first started this Vikings Blood mead, it was at a very low gravity reading. It was probably around 1030 to 1040, which I didn't intend in the beginning for it to be so low, but it actually, I'm actually very interested because I'm doing this thing now called step feeding, which is kind of, adding as much honey as I want in the beginning and letting the yeast kind of start off eating that. And then when it's, starting to go down in gravity, I add more sugar, more honey to the melomel here, which the yeast will, continue eating, and it's still below the alcohol tolerance for it to continue. Sometimes that's good. Say you want to do like a 1.2 or 1.4 gravity reading. That's a little too high for your yeast to actually start off, because there's such a thing as adding too much sugars, where the yeast is kind of overpowered. It doesn't know what to do, so it just kind of stalls at the very beginning. It might kind of start off, but then it slows down and it stalls altogether. So I'm doing that thing, and we're going to check it today. I think it was somewhere around 1060. So if we're taking into account that it was 1030, almost 1040 the first time, we added about 30 more points of gravity when we did the update on the Vikings Blood. That means that this should be somewhere around 1060 to 1070 if we're taking into account the original gravity reading. So we're going to take gravity reading right now, and we're going to see if we want to stop it or if we want to continue step feeding. I have no idea yet. I'm going to taste it, and then I'm going to decide whether I want to continue feeding it. So as you can see, I don't know if it's visible for any of you, but if you can see, there's still fermentation going on here. That doesn't, these little bubbles right here, that's a clear fermentation sign, but that doesn't mean that our mead has reached, where we want it to, because I said that this would probably be around a 10.5% ABV mead. So we're going to check it right now and see, because I don't want this to go completely dry. So I want there to be some residual sweetness in there. So let's go ahead and get that checked out. Okay, so we're set up to take a gravity reading. We have our graduated cylinder all sanitized and our actual hydrometer sanitized. So now we're going to take this stopper out and set it off to the side. First, I'm going to take a smell really carefully. That smells really nice. It smells like wine, which I'm very excited about. Ooh, I hope this is going to be so very good. Everything here has been sanitized. I'm going to take our tube and insert it. Now this can be a little tricky, especially with the cylinder being so wobbly. I'm going to go ahead and stick that in here, and I'm going to kind of hold the cylinder with one hand just to start off, and I'm going to pump a couple times. There we go, just to get the movement started. And we're going to stop right about there. I'm going to take the tube out, and that should be just enough to get a good gravity reading. Be very careful not to spill anything. Also be very careful not to add any oxygen into our mixture, because at this point, if we add any oxygen to the alcohol, well, a lot of oxygen to the alcohol, we can actually introduce things called, we can activate things called acetobacters, and acetobacters create vinegar. And we do not want to turn our alcohol into vinegar, and we're just going to slowly lower this in. So I'm thinking that we're going to be somewhere around, don't overflow. Okay, you know what? Really quickly, I'm going to go get a little tasting glass, and I'm going to pour some off, and then I'm going to come back. Here we go. Putting this in. It was at 1060. We're going to let this drop. And this is actually sitting at 1.00. It's exactly at 1.00. So I'm thinking we're going to take a taste test, and then we're going to decide whether we're going to stop this right now, or if we're going to step feed this one more time and let it go to a higher ABV. So let's go to the taste test. Okay, so here we are with our little taster. If you see the color, the actual lighting in here doesn't betray the color on the camera very much. It's actually very close to what you guys are seeing right now. Kind of looks like Aperol, but a little deeper in color than Aperol. It's a really nice color. I'm actually liking that a lot. Like I said before, it's got a very interesting kind of red wine scent on the nose. I get pear and I get cherry, which is, we didn't add any pear to this. I think our champagne yeast kind of activated some fruity esters in the sugars, or maybe it was just taking some sugary notes from the cherries and the blackberries itself. But very mellow. Liking that a lot too. So the scent and the nose is very good. It's very dry. Almost like a cider. You know what? I'm not liking this the way it is. I think I might take about, I don't know, like a quarter of this and put it in one of my 64-ounce little growlers and let it continue with some step feeding. And then I might get everything else out and transfer it into a carboy for conditioning, because this is not bad at all. It's actually really nice. Light, cidery. You do get kind of this like alcohol-y, like very harsh alcohol, but green brews do have that. So if you let this sit and condition, it'll actually mellow out and you'll get a lot of the flavors that you're looking for. So I'm kind of torn on what to do with this right now. But goddamn, is that good. For it being green, it's really very nice. Alright, well, let's go on to our next stage. Okay, so the next stage of what we're going to do is I'm going to separate the majority of this and put it in a kind of glass, wide mouth glass carboy, and I'm going to put a small majority of this inside of one of my 64-ounce growlers. I'm going to step feed that and let it go a little higher in alcohol, and then I'm going to fortify that and make it into like a, I want it to be somewhere around like a 20% mead. So I think that's what I'm going to do at this moment. So right now I'm going to transfer, let's say 3/4 of this into this wide mouth glass carboy that I have, and then actually put the rest of it into that 64-ounce growler. So let's go. Now this 64-ounce growler was sanitized yesterday. I let it dry out completely, put the cap back on, so I am not too concerned about this being unsanitized or being filthy in any way. So I'm going to go ahead and take this giant, I'm going to call this 2 gallons, because that's right around the 2-gallon mark on this sucker. Look at that nice color. As soon as we start conditioning this and we let it go a little longer, all of that haziness will kind of fall out, and we'll have probably around a 7 out of 10 clear brew. I'm actually hoping that it'll go somewhere like 8 out of 10 in clarity. So we're going to continue transferring this into the 64-ounce growler now. Stop right here on my 64-ounce growler, because you do have to remember I'm going to add more honey to this. Whether I add another pound or another 2 pounds, I'm still going to add more honey, so I'm going to need room in this growler to transfer over the remaining essence. Now that leaves us with about 1/4 of a gallon of material left in the bottom here. Now when you're brewing, for those of you who don't brew, or for those of you who don't know, when you transfer from a primary fermentation into a conditioning phase, you're going to lose about 1/4 of your brew at the bottom. Why is that? Because most people, including me, don't want to transfer that yeast cake or that lees to their conditioning phase, because they want to get as much of their product into a bottle as possible. This is not going to have very much lees in it. I'm actually going to do something to this, and we'll talk about it in a second, that is actually going to stop the fermentation, because I don't want this to ferment anymore. I want this to stay exactly the way it is. So let me put the cap on this. I'm actually going to be putting a stopper in this, and I'm going to be putting another airlock on it, but not right now. I'm going to put this to the side, and I'm going to clean this out. I'll be right back. So I want to go ahead and show this to you guys. So when I did my primary rack, I took out all of the liquid and, cleaned out my vessel and transferred it back in. I wanted to get the majority of the original fruit that I had off of the ferment, because I was afraid that everything was too compact and then it might start to mold. I didn't know how much oxygen I had originally gotten into the brew, so I wanted to get it off of that as soon as possible. The sugars had been eaten out of most of it anyway, so it didn't really matter. But I did mash up a bunch of cherries and separated the juice, and then actually pitted some cherries and put them in, and they were dark red. But I just want to show you what the yeast does to these things. It turned this completely, almost like pale white. Most of the color is gone from this. It's really interesting what happened with these. And I'm actually glad that I did that, because it did add some more color to the brew. Last time we looked at it, it was actually kind of like a pale orange, and I didn't like that. So I did add more pitted cherries, not mashed up or blended, pitted cherries into there to kind of, act as wine grapes. When you leave the skins in, it changes the color and makes it darker. So I'm actually curious. I want to taste this and see how much of the sugars that the yeast got out of this. Just like any other fermented food, it still kind of tastes like a cherry. But there's more of a sour component to there. You do get the yeast in there, and this is not dangerous. If there was any mold on there, if it was looking fishy to me, I would not eat it. But that was really interesting. It kind of has that tannic quality that I'm actually getting from the wine, so I'm glad that the yeast kind of got those tannins out of there. Really, really good. Okay, so the next phase, and probably the last phase that I'm going to do today, is before I let this condition sit down and actually condition and do its job, I'm going to do something to stop the fermentation process. Now, I could do two things here. I could use something called metabisulfate, which is actually potassium metabisulfate, which is a potassium compound that kills the yeast in here, but it's not generally toxic to human beings. So a lot of winemakers use potassium metabisulfate to stop fermentation whenever their brews get to the level that they want them to. Or I could use monk fruit sweetener to sweeten up this brew, because I do want to back sweeten this, because it's a little dry for me. I do want to back sweeten this, so I could use monk fruit sweetener, which is a non-fermentable sweetener, kind of like stevia, but it's more comparable to sugar. And the yeast won't eat that, so the yeast will continue to eat the sugars that are fermentable in this brew, and then they'll just kind of get done with what they're doing, and you'll still have that sweetness in there from the monk fruit. Now, I don't want to sweeten this up too much. This is about 2 gallons of brew here. What I do want to do is I want to degas this. So I'm just kind of swirling this around in there just to kind of release any CO2 that is in there to help this condition. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my monk fruit sweetener. This is golden monk fruit sweetener. It smells almost exactly like brown sugar. It is uncanny. Uncanny how this smells like black sugar. But there's no glycogens. It is low glycemic, meaning that there's no fermentable sugars in here. 0 calories, low glycemic, good for me. This is actually kind of like what I've been starting to do with cocktails. I've been making my simple syrups out of monk fruit sweetener. For 2 gallons of this, I'm going to start off with about 1.5 cups of monk fruit sweetener. So, here we go. There's my cup. And actually, you know what? A cup and around about 1/4. 1.25 cups. That's good enough for me. Seal that up. Put it away. And next up, we want to stir this so that our sugar combines. Now I'm using a slotted spoon because I don't want to use a whisk. The reason I don't want to use a whisk is because a whisk easily incorporates oxygen into your brews. And remember what I said earlier, if you add oxygen into this brew at this time, very, very possible that you could add, you can activate those acetobacters and turn this into vinegar. And I do not want that. So I'm just slowly stirring this, making sure that all of my monk fruit sweetener combines. So I'm done with that. I'm going to take my spoon, and put that sucker in the sink. Give this a small little swirl, just to kind of get rid of the rest of those gases in there. One smell. That's smelling really nice. I do think that the sweetener, having back sweetened this, that it's going to not take a majority of the dryness away. It's still going to be dry. We're still going to have those tannins, but I feel like I'm going to be able to kind of pull those cherry notes out of there and those blackberry notes out of there, which is the majority reason for why we use them in this brew, because I like those flavors. So I'm going to go ahead and put my lids on. And later, I'm going to convert this into a fermenter. So I'm actually going to drill a hole into the top, just big enough, just big enough to where I can squeeze an airlock in there and get an airtight seal. So at the moment, we're done here. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.